Welcome to the Independent Schools podcast with me, Juliet Corbett. I'm absolutely passionate about adapting best practice and research from the business sector to address the real-world challenges being faced by schools. In this podcast, leaders of independent schools will learn actionable tips and strategies to strengthen their school's income streams, be it through fees, fundraising, or commercial ventures. So thanks for joining me today, and let's jump straight in. Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of the Independent School podcast. So this week I am delighted to be joined by Simon Lerwill, who is the Foundation Director of Marlborough College. So Marlborough College is an independent full boarding school for boys and girls aged 13 to 18. It's been in existence since 1843 and it's located in Wiltshire here in the UK. Before joining Marlborough in January 2020, Simon was Director of Development and Alumni Relations for the University of Birmingham for 4 years. And prior to that, he was Development Director for King Edward's School, also in Birmingham. There he established their development office and led an incredibly successful bursary fundraising campaign. So today, Simon and I are going to talk about a couple of different topics. We're going to kick off by talking about the difference between fundraising for schools and universities and the lessons that each can learn from each other. We then move on to the impacts of COVID-19 and specifically around furloughing development staff and the impact on Marlborough's fundraising plans going forwards. So without any further ado, let's get going. So thanks for joining us on the Independent Schools podcast, Simon.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So, like you, I've spent some of my career in university fundraising as well as fundraising within schools. And I've noticed that there are some real differences and also some similarities between university and school fundraising. I just wondered what your thoughts are on the differences between those two environments.
I think you're right. I think there are similarities and differences, and it's not necessarily about one being in any way better to work than the other. They're just different. There's probably 4 main differences, I think, which I can go into in more detail. So, I mean, one is scale. So obviously schools, just as organisations, schools are a lot smaller. I think Marlborough is in the hundreds of staff, whereas University of Birmingham, where I worked before, was 8,000 staff. Then you've got the kind of size of the community, so the alumni body. Again, at Marlborough, it's about 10, 12,000, whereas at university, it was 200,000. Then the affinity of that community, which arguably is a lot stronger in schools than it is in universities for all sorts of reasons. And finally, the fundraising opportunities are different. So you're actually more restricted in schools than you are in universities because you haven't got all that comes with research. So I think those are kind of the main 4 areas. When I was thinking about this, where there are big differences, it's kind of about scale and then about how the alumni feel about the place and what fundraising opportunities there are.
Yeah, I completely agree. And funny enough, my notes in front of me, I have those exact 4 points. So I think
Nice.
we're in agreement on some of those things. So
people are going to think we plotted.
I know. It was interesting though to see that because my experience was in Oxford and Cambridge settings, so it is slightly different within Oxford and Cambridge colleges, but still similarities with other universities. So taking those in turn then, so the scale of the staff and the alumni, I kind of lumped those together a little bit, but the thoughts from me around that was obviously the way that you communicate with any audience is going to massively change when you're thinking about the kind of 10,000 alumni as opposed to the hundreds of thousands of alumni. And I think during this COVID era, to some extent, some of that has, the playing field has leveled in the sense that when we're doing virtual events and things like that, we can actually have hundreds and hundreds of alumni on the line, or we can have 70 highly engaged alumni on the line, and the same format can work to some extent for both scales. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe there are other platforms, but with Zoom, I think we're limited to 300 people. So I think that's worked well in schools. I don't know, in a university setting, whether you might get oversubscribed for virtual platforms. But I think it has done is it's meant events can be truly global. I think that's been an interesting thing about the pandemic. You can have a panelist speaker sitting in New York or Sydney. So and anyone can attend as well. So it doesn't, an event in London can be attended by anyone. So I think that's interesting. I think that is interesting. There are I mean, there are differences that the scale provides. Universities have more resource. And I remember going to, when I worked at King Edward's, at my first school, I remember going to the Case Regular Giving Conference, which is mainly aimed at universities. And I remember just being blown away by how much they were doing in that space, because they've just got the bigger teams and the bigger resource, and they can specialize more. So you can just get really into specifics. That someone in university, my team, someone's job, social media, that was it. That was their job. Someone else was the telephone campaign. Someone else was research. Someone else was a certain type of event. So you just get much more specialization than you do in schools, and you can therefore do more with a bigger budget. So I went from a budget of $250,000 at King Edward's to 2.5 million at the University of Birmingham. So more zeros on the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And the data that you produce, you can use in different ways from that too. So for things like regular giving, you can split your group in half or into three and test different communications messages and see which email title people mostly clicked on and things like that, which actually, when you're looking at the scale for a school and addition to the staffing, actually isn't as feasible, that kind of analysis of big scale data.
Yeah, that's true. You've got more data, so you can do more with it at university. Although probably increasingly the use of data is more important than ever across all types of charity, large or small. But you're right, you've got a bigger data set at the university, so therefore that gives you more insight, more power.
Yeah. And then thinking about the staff outside the development function as well, I found that within university setting, the number of speakers and subjects that those people can speak on is naturally quite wide. So you can have subject speakers on the different research areas that the university is focusing on, whereas, and obviously your alumni body is larger, so seeking speakers from within that alumni body, you've got quite a lot of really quite significant players that you could invite to speak, whereas within a school it's a slightly more limited kind of network which you can reach out to in terms of securing speakers. Is that something that you found?
Possibly. I mean, you've got a bigger alumni body at the university compared to a school. I think one of the benefits of having a smaller organization with a smaller alumni body, it feels much more part of a family. So I think you get to know the teachers, the staff, the non-teaching staff, your alumni, your donors, much better at a school than you do at a university, where I think it can feel more anonymous, and that's just due to numbers. In terms of speakers, I don't know. I think one of the interesting things might come on to, there's this paradox really, in that although the community is smaller, the affinity is a lot stronger in schools.
Yes.
So my guess would be that yes, you've got less alumni, but they'd be more willing to get involved and to speak and to give and so forth.
Which brings us on to that next point that you made at the beginning there about affinity and the levels of affinity that potential donors have with the school being potentially higher than that with the university. Is that something that you've experienced in your career as well?
Yes, and I started out in telephone fundraising, and actually that's the percentage of people who give over the phone is a pretty good indicator of the affinity. And what you used to find, this is generalizing, but top of the tree was Oxbridge. So they might get 60 to 70% of people giving in a telephone campaign. Mm-hmm. Then comes schools who might get 40 to 50.
Yeah.
And then at the bottom is universities who, maybe 10 to 20, maybe 30%, if they're lucky. And I think what that shows is just how strong the affinity is at Oxbridge, how strong, because it's close knit. You're in your college.
Yes,
that's really important. At schools, it's a kind of very life forming time. I think that creates a very strong affinity. And universities are just seen, I think, more transactionally. I think people go there to get the degree to get onto their career. That's not to say people don't feel, strongly for their university, but I think as a general rule, people feel less strong for their university than they do for their school or their Oxbridge College.
Yeah, I think that idea of affinity has two sources. The first is the actual student experience or the pupil experience, so the way that people experience their school time or their time at university, and clearly that's going to be the foundation for an affinity going forwards, but that actually the schools and universities can then foster that affinity through time by truly engaging with people because they want their input into a vibrant school community or a vibrant university community. And this isn't just about fundraising from them, this is about them being drawn in and nurtured into a community of people that are helping each other, that are supporting each other, and that are learning from each other through their lifetime. And so that affinity, even if you're starting from a situation where you don't have a great affinity with your alumni group, as long as there's little nuggets of affinity in there, that can be increased through the actions that you take as an institution. And that's an important lesson for the schools that have either changed their name or who have merged or who have evolved over time. And some alumni haven't necessarily had a great experience at that institution at the time, but actually by enabling them to connect to the school as it is now, you can actually develop a really strong relationship with those alumni going forwards. And even though their donation levels may not be as big as if they'd had an overwhelmingly positive experience at school, it's entirely possible to draw them in to be a really active part of your school community.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're talking about lessons you can learn from each other. I think one of the big lessons that universities can learn from schools and Oxbridge colleges, and I'm treating Oxbridge colleges as separate to universities. I know that I know it's a university,
They're a bit of
but they are a special
right,
case.
yeah.
And in this sense, I kind of lump them with schools. And I think universities can probably learn just how important that affinity building is, and actually what the universities need to do therefore is work a lot harder to create that. And that might mean at Birmingham, we were talking about trying to create those special moments or memories. There was an old kind of myth that if you walked under the clock tower before you'd finished your exams, you'd fail your degree. And just then playing around with that and making sure after your graduation people went through the tower, and you're just trying to create these moments that actually people remember and creates a sense of affinity and identity.
Yeah.
And the other thing you can do then is think of things like halls of residence and departments, places where actually you do start to get smaller groups coming together, or sports teams at university, and play on the affinity there amongst those groups, and you can build communications in that way. So at Birmingham they pioneered about 10 years ago having an alumni relations manager based in the 5 faculties, the 5 colleges, so they could start to communicate almost at a group level.
Yeah. And I think, there's actually research that shows that as human beings, we like to be in groups of about 500. When you look at the way that the military is set up, the way that successful organizations are set up, when you get to communities that are larger than about 500, it starts to fragment into smaller little groups. And so if you can make sure that you're engaging with your alumni in those naturally forming but smaller communities within your university or your school environment, then it can actually produce that stronger affinity.
That's interesting.
Yeah, we also used to say, I remember when I was in Cambridge, we used to say that you can create a tradition in 3 or 4 years. If the first years do it their first year, and then the second year, the first and second years do it, and by the time you get to the third year and then the fourth year, the freshers that are coming in think that everyone's done this forever, because you've only got a lifetime of 3 to 4 years worth of at least undergraduate students, because the turnover happens quite quickly. So actually you can create traditions and make them fun, make them kind of meaningful, which then actually can actually be established relatively quickly in an environment, in a university environment, whereas actually within a school environment, because pupils are there for much longer, that does build to a naturally stronger affinity, just the length of time that you're often with a school being greater than a university, but that actually it takes longer to initiate a tradition and for it to be established and thought of as being a completely natural part of the school's life.
On similarity between schools and universities, which I think is a big kind of irony, is the fundraising opportunity. So that schools is buildings or bursaries basically, and universities you've got the research. At Birmingham we had youth mental health and climate change and plastics and cancer, so it's kind of more interesting as a fundraiser. But I think one of the big ironies, it seems to me, is you've got almost an easier toolkit as a fundraiser in a university, but a harder sell to make because of the weaker affinity. And in a school, maybe in Oxbridge College, you've got a much stronger affinity, but a smaller toolkit. Yes. Which is why I was thinking about it, thinking what lessons can be learned. That's why I was saying I think universities probably need to engage more, but maybe actually schools and Oxbridge colleges need to get more creative about how they match the more limited opportunities they do have to donors. It's interesting, that irony, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. And certainly I think that's one of the ways that Oxbridge colleges do kind of have it all, because they can fundraise for research-based fellowships. which, although they may not be specifically research projects, are clearly linked to a particular subject that a donor might have a passion for. And so that is one of the reasons, I think, as well, that they, in terms of the fundraising results they're able to generate, they do have a bit of an advantage. They have the list of projects at their fingertips that they can fundraise for, simultaneously with that stronger affinity.
They've got stronger affinity and they've got the big list.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So it's interesting, though, that the idea that whatever, so from a school's point of view, the disadvantage is you don't have such a breadth of fundraising projects to talk to potential donors about. Then yes, so the lesson there being, how can you create that breadth, or at least create that flexibility within whatever campaign focus you have to engage the interests of a particular donor. And potentially that's actually going to become more of a challenge, because as schools focus more and more on bursaries as opposed to capital campaigns and bursaries kind of simultaneously, you're almost voluntarily cutting back even further on your possible projects. I know quite a few schools prioritize bursaries, but kind of have in the back of their mind, okay, if someone really wants to give to buildings, then this is the thing that we need. Often they're slightly smaller scale, maybe refurbishments rather than big builds.
Which we will do, because you've always got to be donor led. Career path wise, I think schools, because they're more generalist, are a very good place to start. I mean, that was kind of by luck for me, but universities tend to be full of specialists, but actually setting up a school office, as I did at King Edward's from scratch, I got to know quite a little about a lot, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Which, when I got to university, was helpful, because I might not know exactly what the data team or the events team or the comms team were up to. I'm not a specialist, but I did know generally how it all worked and fitted together.
And that's really interesting personally, because having had the experience in the Oxford environment and then in independent schools, my experience is based in smaller communities with smaller teams who are quite generalist. So because my background, and that's what I've really enjoyed, is that variety that you get being a director of development in a smaller team. And so when I work with people, I think it helps them to know that I get the fact that you can't be a specialist in every single area. You've got 101 things to juggle simultaneously, and a small team to do it with. That's actually quite a different skill set, quite a different expertise. Moving on then, something that obviously with COVID-19 hitting, this is the big topic that everyone's kind of struggling with, and the innovation that we're seeing in the sector, across the schools fundraising sector, and the challenges that we're facing within schools fundraising is obviously quite significant at the moment. Something that's been worrying me a bit is I've been quite surprised at how many schools have been furloughing significant parts of their development team, and that's really impacted on their ability to nurture especially alumni relationships at a really critical time. Now, I can understand some of the rationale behind that, and I completely understand the financial situation that many schools are in is extremely challenging, but this is something that I've been quite surprised by and worried by, this trend. And I just noticed recently on LinkedIn that it's something that you've commented on as well, and it's something that's worried you.
Yeah, it's a live discussion here at the moment at Marlborough, and I think it's a really difficult one. I know of a development director at another school who was asked back in March by their head to furlough themselves. I know of another school where the development office of 5 is now down to 1.
Yeah.
So I come at this in two ways. On the one hand, it worries me, because it suggests to me that schools where the majority of the office are being furloughed, or the director, that they don't really get what development alumni relations is about, and about the fact it's for the long term.
Yes.
And also the fact that we are income generating offices, which you would think at the moment would be the very offices you would protect. Yeah. So I feel like that on the one hand. On the other hand, I do get this is an incredibly difficult time, and there are some schools, and again I was reading on LinkedIn today, 5 independent schools have recently closed. Yeah. So there are some schools where this is really, really serious, and they're trying to make decisions now about whether they can even run the school. And when you're up against that kind of decision, and you've got a development personal team, I get that these are really hard decisions to make. So it's not easy, but it does worry me, because I think of the signal it shows, and I think the case for development, and we need to always be making the case for what we're doing. I think it almost needs to be made more than ever.
I think you're right. And I think something that I've heard from alumni that I've worked with all the way through my career is you only get in touch when you're asking for money. And I remember back at the beginning of my career kind of being quite defensive and saying, no, that's not true, you know, and then listing all the ways that we actually got in touch with them at other times as well. More recently, as I kind of matured through my career, I switched to really then asking them why they really felt that way, because if that genuinely is how they feel, then it's obviously something that we need to understand better and adjust to, so that we can adjust our activity. What worries me is that as we go through this, for schools that have furloughed staff, that could be a really accurate representation, that you only really want to communicate with your alumni when you're ready to fundraise from them, and that at this time when our alumni actually could benefit from the social interaction, the career support, the different ways that we're working with our school communities, just because we're not able to ask necessarily for substantial gifts at the moment, this sense that we're going to retrench the office is sending out not necessarily a particularly helpful signal.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a danger that people think fundraising is a switch, and we'll just turn it on and turn it off when we need some money.
Yeah.
And it's a very different kind of income source, and it doesn't work like that. It's not a tap. It's not a cap. We're not a cash machine. It's a long-term game, and there'll be wins and good years and kind of bad years along the way. But you've got to stay with it, and you've got to invest in it. And particularly, actually, during this time, so that there's research from the last recession that CAF did. That yes, giving fell by 11%, but that major donors tended to carry on giving.
Yes.
And they tended to carry on giving to those organisations and charities that stayed in touch and stayed connected. And those that didn't were the ones they stopped giving to. So there is a connection about just staying engaged in a non-fundraising way. There's a connection between that and fundraising, giving.
Absolutely. So
at Marlborough, what we've done the last 2 months is almost kind of hyper engaged. We've changed the way we engage, but we've reached out to as many alumni and donors as we can. And you talk about not always asking for money. We've run a telephone campaign over the last 5 weeks, staffed by volunteers, to phone our most isolated alumni over 70, and that has been just to have a call, check they're okay, and have a bit of a chat.
Yeah.
And no mention of money. And a number of calls where the people go, hold on, you're not asking for money. We're like, no, we're just calling to have a conversation. That those kind of calls will stand out and actually start to change people's opinion of what we do and what we're about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you're running that with Buffalo, is that right? Are you?
Yes,
working with
right.
Buffalo? Yeah. So I actually worked with Buffalo back in 2008. I ran an affinity campaign, telephone campaign with them. From Marlborough College in Cambridge. We had some very frustrated alumni at the time due to our name change, and we switched all the fundraising off during that crisis, and we went into hyper engagement mode, as you just accurately described it. We talked to as many people as possible, and the telephone campaign mechanism, but as an affinity campaign, was a fantastic way of talking to people and hearing their views and really making sure that we were genuinely listening to people and their concerns. And that was instrumental in helping us to move past that and move through that crisis for that particular institution. And certainly I see that being done across the sector. Sometimes it's just literally the development director snatching a few minutes here and there in a busy day to make a few phone calls. Other times, like Marlborough's doing, it's much more structured around a traditional telephone campaign model. Have you defined metrics that you're using to assess the success of that campaign?
Yes, I mean they're a bit finger in the air, because the callers have to judge it, but we ask them to judge at the end of the call whether it's been received positively or not. I think 90% of the calls have been received positively.
Yes.
And we've also asked, whether they need any specific help or follow-up. And several did. I mean, not a huge number. We tried to speak to 500. I think in the end we had calls with over 100 individuals. But yeah, ultimately they've been received really positively. And, we've gathered some data as well, and some memories, and some, some feedback, some thoughts. And it's all good, really.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And the reason I ask about metrics is because I think that links back to the previous comments we were making about internal communications, about what development's about, and about how it's important to continue to develop relationships at this moment. And some of those metrics, I think, can be helpful in reporting back to senior management and other staff and better understand what it is that a development office is designed to do. And yes, those metrics around fundraising targets may well be slightly altered for this year, but in actual fact, those other metrics around engagement, whatever that might be, depending on how you're engaging, collecting the data and presenting it in an easily understandable way is one way to communicate what it is that the development office is doing and the impact, the positive impact it's having.
Yeah, and actually that's just very a live discussion here. We're looking at engagement metrics, which everyone grapples with. There's kind of no silver bullet around it, I don't think. But it is important that you have metrics on engagement alongside your fundraising. So we are looking to have metrics that really try to explain how many people are giving their time or coming to events or just engaging with us in any way, and measure that and track that and grow that, because it's important in and of itself, but because we also know that engaged people or volunteers are more likely to give. So
absolutely,
there's a link as well to fundraising.
Yes, absolutely. And I think those of us in the sector aren't embarrassed to say there is a link. We do genuinely want to engage our alumni and communities because we want their input and volunteer hours and expertise, but there are other ways that you can support, and one of those is financially. I've been quite surprised as well. One of the other things that surprised me across the school sector is the number of schools that have completely stopped fundraising and have entirely stopped asking and have switched to engagement. And I completely understand that's a natural reaction to crisis, but one of the other things that I'm looking for, hopefully in the sector going forwards, is the confidence in the case for support around whatever it is that we're fundraising for, be it bursaries or capital campaigns. I think bursaries might be easier, but having the confidence and the belief in that case that actually we can continue to make asks. I mean, I was speaking earlier today with a major gifts fundraiser for one of the premier cultural institutions in London, and they're still doing major gifts asks. They're getting 7-figure gifts in for a building project, and I just worry that the schools are stepping back a little too much. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yes, I think that's probably true. I mean, I've seen a lot of universities, you see their kind of COVID-19 appeals from Oxford and Imperial and Birmingham and Manchester, whether that's to do with research or whether that's actually about student support and the fact that more students than ever are going to need help. And I think there is an argument, around bursaries that, that now more than ever, people are going to need help, and independent schools need to be seen and just need to be doing the reaching out to disadvantaged individuals and communities. So I think you're right. If that case of support is strong enough, then it must and should ride out something like this. We haven't stopped fundraising. I mean, just because of where we are in terms of planning for a major bursary campaign, we've not been actively fundraising, but we wouldn't have been anyway. But we did, like many schools, when we reduced the fees for parents, we did ask parents whether they would consider giving the full fee for the summer term, and the difference then formed a hardship fund to help those parents struggling to pay the fees, and we raised $250,000 from that. So that it's going to help many families. So I think it's a balance. I agree with you that we shouldn't be shy of fundraising, but I also think we shouldn't be out, with billboards and flashing lights,
yes,
probably in people's faces at the moment, because of all the importance we've talked about engagement at this time, and almost the importance of us giving to them rather than people giving to us at the moment. Yeah. So I think it's probably a balance, but I would agree with your general point about the case for support should be strong enough.
Yeah, and like taking the time to review that case for support and talk to people in general sense, so that you're getting the information flow about the sorts of things that might work within a case for support. I think over the next couple of months, hopefully schools will be moving in that direction, so that then come the autumn time, people are ready to feel confident that they have a case for support that not only reflects the COVID situation that we're in, but also actually addresses the school's belief in whatever the project is that they're prioritizing. So you're prioritizing, so you're doing bursary fundraising, that's your campaign going forwards.
That's the big priority. I mean, I think you're seeing this shift in independent schools away from capital towards bursaries anyway, which I think is right. And towards partnership as well. I mean, I think increasingly partnership bursaries are kind of bedfellows really. But yes, at Marlborough, the big push is going to be on bursaries in the future.
Yeah. So you're in the early stages of planning that bursary campaign. So has anything with the COVID situation affected or changed your plans going forward with that? So the timing or the scale or case for support?
Actually, not particularly. I think where I'm very lucky at Marlborough is that the chair of governors or chair of councils, it's called here, and the master are, this is their vision. They both will articulate that increasing access is one of their key priorities, and they don't see that what's happened has changed that. That it's a long-term ambition. So yes, we've got a pandemic at the moment, but they're thinking 5, 10, 20 years ahead. So nothing changes in that sense, and we carry on. So I've been working on that strategy just as I would have been. I mean, one thing that changed was I was planning to do some kind of focus groups to get current major donors together to talk to them about what we're thinking, and also some parents as well. And what's interesting is traditionally, I guess, I would have defaulted to doing some kind of dinner, or normally you do this almost as a social gathering. And when I've done those in the past, they've kind of sometimes worked, sometimes not.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, what we did in the pandemic was we did some Zoom calls with 8 to 10 people on each, and they worked really, really well because Zoom actually works well when it's almost one person speaking after the other.
Yeah.
That kind of inbuilt stiltedness, if I can call it that, really works for a focus group. And you didn't have the tangents you get at a kind of social function like a dinner where suddenly start talking in all sorts of directions. It was very focused, and we got lots of useful feedback. And it was very much easy to organise because you weren't having to plan a whole dinner and book tables and menus and dietary requirements and sort diaries out. Most people are free at the moment. They can come on Zoom for an hour and we were done. It was very easy to organise. So that's been interesting, a different way to engage. And I do think that's one thing that will change, is the use of technology to stay in touch with donors and alumni in the future.
Yeah, and the opportunities it opens up for the international side of the fundraising relationships that you're building. Okay,
exactly.
You wouldn't choose, if we had the choice eventually, hopefully, to do an entire major gifts cultivation on Zoom, but actually there are many steps in that process which Zoom is actually really well suited for. And so after the crisis, as things calm down again and we can meet face to face, you could see how you would design some of those interactions to be face to face, because it's really important you have that connection. But some of those catch-up interactions that happen along the way when you're developing these relationships over time, a video call is actually a really good use of people's time, and people feel quite natural and comfortable, I think, now.
Yes, no, I completely agree. I think particularly for global fundraising, it will change.
Yeah.
But probably in a good way.
Yes, hopefully, we'll see. So what's your outlook finally for schools fundraising as we come through this crisis and out the other side?
Well, you have to look to history, really, and it's difficult because they're not pandemics, but we've been through recessions, financial crises before, and come out the other side. So I think the long-term picture has to be fine. That independent education will always be there. That there will always be the need for funds and engagement, alumni and development. So long-term, I think it's all right. It's the short, medium term, I guess, worries me more, and everything's just so unknown. We've had what we're calling the first peak. Who knows if there's a second or a third, or if this now just goes away, and at what point we're back to fully normal. Will we ever be back to fully normal? I think there will be change. We've already talked about the use of technology. I think that will happen with alumni events as well.
Yes.
As well as fundraising. So I think there will be a change there in use of technology. I think that's probably a good thing. And there probably will be a short-term, hit in fundraising, I would guess, because of the financial impact, and because although Zoom's very good, I would still not be convinced that when you're really having that serious gift discussion that's going to be the way to do it, or certainly not the way to initiate. I'm still not convinced. I've got a lot of people want to go meet for the first time, and I'm still not convinced I want to do that over Zoom.
Yeah. My gut instinct at the moment is that if you've got a warm prospect, then taking them through the latter stages of that cultivation and doing an ask is possible on Zoom in certain circumstances and for the right case for support at the right time. Starting with a donor relationship from scratch on Zoom is another kettle of fish. It will wait and see what happens, but I think that is particularly challenging. I think there will be a tendency to wait till we can meet people in person to develop those relationships from scratch. But the longer this crisis goes on, the more people will have to adapt to that. And so maybe it's possible.
we may both be eating these words
I
in
know.
6 months' time as we embark on a series of first meetings on Zoom.
In which case, let's talk again at that point and exchange lessons and see what works. We're recording this on the 4th of June 2020, just for the reference. That's the situation now. Thank you so much, Simon, for joining us today. Really great to hear your thoughts on where we are at the moment and the comparison between schools and universities as well. So thank you very much indeed.
No problem at all. Nice speaking with you.
So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. This is the middle of 3 episodes focusing on fundraising. So do check out last week's episode on navigating fundraising uncertainty. And next week, I'll be reflecting on the trends which are emerging from IDPE Live, the virtual conference, which has been happening last week and this week. This is because I am launching my fundraising focus program again for September entry. So if you're interested in getting some support for your school's fundraising, then do take a look at the link which is shared in the episode notes. Fantastic. I look forward to talking to you again next week. Bye then. So that's it for now, and thanks for listening. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the Independent School Podcast to hear our next episode, or sign up for my regular newsletter at www.consultjuliet.co.uk/sign up. Great, see you next time.